Thank you. Today, we are talking about Houston. We have a quality problem. Why security audits need an upgrade. Let's see if this works. It does. A quick overview of what we're discussing today. First, I'll touch on why audit quality matters. Then we'll jump into why audit quality is actually variable. And lastly, we'll touch on solutions and implementation steps, perhaps the most important part of the talk. If you want today's slides, QR code and the link is there, and will be also seen later at the end. Quick background about me. I'm an engineer. I do security stuff at yAudit and yAcademy. PS, yAcademy, we offer free security training, mostly Solidity security, but right now we're doing our first ZK security track as well. I used to do Web 2 security, before that, hardware stuff. Why improving smart contract security matters. I think everyone in this room understands that security is important in the blockchain space, especially for smart contracts. When you're putting your money there, you want it to be secure. Otherwise, your money won't be there for long. Hacks definitely hurt a lot of people, users in Web3 protocols, and generally the entire ecosystem if it's a big enough event. The last bullet here, as the ecosystem matures, the security should be improving, and the security practices and processes we use should also improve along with it. I would use the analogy of the early internet. When the internet was first created, we did not have HTTPS as a widespread technology, and nowadays that's a very different story. You could even say the same with early smartphones. Early smartphones were not exactly the most secure operating systems, even personal computer operating systems, but over time that changes. So basically, as technology matures, security becomes more important and it evolves. The problem that we are talking about today is the variability of audit quality. And some of the key factors here that alter the quality of an audit is the time spent with the code. If you give an auditor 1 day with the code versus 1 month with the code, the result of what they will find is very different, obviously. If you have more time to understand the code, you will probably find more bugs. Same goes for the skill level of auditors. If you take someone who has never done an audit versus someone with a lot of experience, the results will differ. There are also some common gaps just generally in the auditing space. One is whether the code that got audited is what is on chain. And this actually is a relatively frequent occurrence because when you do an audit, often there are issues. Now these issues should be fixed before they go on chain, but when the changes are made, is there another audit review of those changes? So there's actually a website that tried to track this. Then for audited code, whether it's checking on-chain values. So often audits are just focused on Solidity code or Viper code or any code, but they don't consider the on-chain values once the contract's deployed. So some of these values might be in the deployment script, some of them might be set by the owner after deployment, and you just don't see it during the audit. It's only when it's on-chain that you might see these. Finally, risk analysis. This is tangentially related to security. Sometimes with these DeFi protocols, there are economic values set, and some of these might not be properly considered in the security analysis. It's more of an economic analysis. So there's a lot of ways that audit quality can vary, and sometimes not for the best. Another very unfortunate part of security in 2023 in Web3 is this term auditor. I talked about this in my talk last week at BlockSplit, but the term auditor doesn't mean much in Web3 security. If you want to be an auditor, you just put that in your Twitter bio, and you just start calling yourself an auditor. So unfortunately, in other fields, auditor actually means you are certified, you've gone through a certain process, you follow certain rules. Not really the case in our world. This also means that some people who claim to do audits, they will give reports, but we really don't have a good way of checking, like, is this a good report? Is this doing proper due diligence on everything they should be doing? So it's really the Wild West right now. I will say specifically a very brief history lesson on crypto security Twitter. Didn't know, bet you didn't know that existed, but it definitely does. Maybe 6 months ago, a lot of people on Twitter realized they can call themselves auditors and do independent security audits. So now there's a lot of people speaking very loudly on Twitter about how amazing, how smart they are. They're finding all these bugs. And let me tell you, if that was the true story, we wouldn't actually be seeing the hacks that we are in this space. It's almost like this bubble where everyone thinks they're really smart and proclaiming they can find everything, but then you look at the reality and we're still having all these hacks in the space. It's just, there's some cognitive dissonance. There's a bit of a difference with what people claim and what's happening. Before we go to the next slide, I have a question for the audience. How many of you are developers or work on protocols and you've been involved in the process of selecting an audit or just seeing how this works? Can I see a show of hands? Okay, so you can put your hands down now. For those of you that raised your hands, how many of you chose to do an audit with someone that you either found on Twitter, that you got a referral from, or just someone you knew? Can I see how many of those who raised their hands use those methods? No, okay, that's interesting. Because I suspect that in general, people are using Twitter to find someone or a referral, or they just know someone, and that is leading us to what I would consider this issue, where the audit shopping market right now is very confusing. I'm sure some people are overpaying, some are underpaying. You don't really know what the product you are getting is at the end of the day. You just hope that you give some funds to the security person, they sprinkle magic security dust on your code by looking at it, and boom, you are secure. Unfortunately, that's not an ideal situation to be in. We should be using more data-driven metrics. We should be understanding who's actually doing audits, focus on certain protocols, who's a specialist in this area, and also assessing based on your budget what's the best choice, because obviously budget is very important. So what I would say is that we have this situation where people, the developers, I really feel for the developers, don't have great information on how to determine who can help them with an audit. If I had a stable coin for every time someone asked me what are some good audit firms to get quotes from, I would no longer be a crypto shrimp, that's for sure. It's just a very confusing field that moves fast, and there's not a lot of clear information on who's good right now. Even if there's an audit firm that's well known, the auditors at these audit firms move around a lot. It's not like one person's just staying there forever. So things change. That's the one constant in this space. Now, ideally, what should be happening instead of shopping blind is doing some sort of data-driven analysis and then deciding who to go with based on past results. And that's sort of what we're going to talk about today. Related prior art, so there are some people who have thought about this in the past, but I think most of what I'm talking about today is perhaps the first time we're discussing it. So there is this dashboard created by Sherlock that tracked differences between the on-chain deployed code and what was audited. So if you see that the audit only covered 50% of the on-chain code, that might make you worried, because you would understand that the other 50% might hold a lot of bugs, and the audit that covered 50% of the code might not be very useful. Unfortunately, the dashboard is offline now. I do hope they bring it back. Finally, we have DeFi safety. They do independent quality and ratings for different protocols. And the one thing here is that even though they are trying to provide a third-party assessment, it's an assessment of the protocol, not the audits. And it's also not focusing on the actual code. It's just focusing on, are the protocols following a certain process? Are they doing due diligence in these ways? So it's like a checklist more than an in-depth analysis. So really not much has been done to try and assess the quality of audits at this time. Who is auditing? The auditors. I have to say this is not just about the developers choosing who will do an audit of their code, and it's not just the Web3 users trying to not get hacked or rugged using new protocols, but if you think of the greater ecosystem, unfortunately, a lot of DeFi projects get in the news, mainstream news, for getting hacked, and that just does not reflect well on the entire ecosystem. And there's obviously questions being asked outside of just the degen space. Even normies are wondering, if you did an audit and you got hacked, like what good was the audit? So even regulators in the future might be asking, like, what is this auditor term that you speak of? It doesn't mean much. So we should really be getting ahead of what might be coming down the road and think about this, how to do this properly. Okay, now for the important part of today's presentation, some solutions. These are just some ideas. There are definitely a lot of others, and I don't want to turn this into a 3-hour talk, keep it short, but some ideas. One of them is portable ratings for individual auditors. So even though an audit firm has many people, specific people are doing your audit, so if we could have ratings to indicate how skilled these people are, it might be helpful. Second, some metrics for audit reports. If we can determine how good audit reports from a certain person, a certain firm are, and if it's automated, then we can just have it processing online, and you can actually see some numbers that might help you make good decisions. Third, standardized best practices and checklists. If we could have some checklist that's known to have a lot of good ways to verify that you're not missing the most common bugs, that would be great. Finally, some reviews. I don't see any reason not to do reviews for audits because we do it for restaurants. Why not the more important things in life? Okay, so I'm going to jump into each one of these and give some more detail. So first, on the auditor rating idea, we actually have some platforms in this space that do competitive audits. So Codarena and Sherlock, they allow auditors to compete to find bugs on a single code base. And then at the end of the competition timeline, you see the results, you see who found the most, who found the least, etc. So we don't really need to create any new project. We already have projects in the space that are delivering data on this. Of course, the data is limited to people who participate, but still, it's a starting point. In terms of creating a portable rating, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's many rating systems out there. I'm proposing the chess rating system just because it has some analogies that we might be able to borrow. For example, above a certain number can correlate to a master level auditor, or above another rating, maybe a grandmaster auditor, so a really skilled person. And this would just be a way that you could have some sense of what this number means instead of a meaningless number of like 100. It's like, my rating's 100. What does that mean? If we can correlate it to something else, that might help understanding. Now, the third bullet, audit firms have variability, so measure at the individual level. This is what I mentioned before. Individuals move where they're working at. Some people want to branch out and do their independent work. So if we do this at the individual level and not at the audit firm level, it's more portable and also more accurate, because an audit firm can have a great reputation 3 years ago, but their current team is completely different, and that means their output is completely different. So individual level might be better for the ratings. Okay, I already mentioned this, but briefly, one of the difficulties with the rating system might be that the chess rating system, it's for one-on-one matches. Now, these audit contests are not one-on-one, it's more like one against many. You're competing against everyone for a week, and then you just hope that your results are good. So we need some way to modify the formula in order to allow it to work in this case. We also want a rating system that makes sure that it compares your results relative to the other people competing. So if you're in a really tough auditing competition and you come in third place, that should give you a higher rating than coming third place in a competition with very low level auditors competing. So yeah, strength of competitors should be factored in. There's also different rating systems. I'm not an expert on this, but we can consider other options. This is one example of one of these auditing competitions, or the leaderboard of Codarena. And you can see here that really it's, are we going to have a laser pointer? Nope. So you can see that really the scoring is just done by the amount of earnings that each person gets. So it's it's not really a rating that's portable. It's just like, okay, this person earned this amount in this amount of time. It's not something you can transfer around as a useful metric. So unfortunately, nothing really implemented here that we can borrow. But Sherlock, another similar firm, they do have this points column. And yes, that doesn't really correlate to an existing rating system. If these were chess ratings, all of these people would be beginners. But of course, this is the top of the leaderboard, so that's not quite the case. But if we could somehow correlate these points to a rating system that we can make analogies to, like a master level auditor, grandmaster level auditor, and if we can make the ratings portable to different settings, that would be amazing. So a little closer on Sherlock. Okay, implementation steps. How do we make this happen so we can actually use this quality metric? As I mentioned, we need to adapt the rating formula for non-one-on-one competitions. We need to create a database to maintain these ratings, keep them up to date. And ideally, optional, we have Codearena and Sherlock help out with this. Maybe it's easier to pull the results through an API or something. Okay, this was just the first solution. We have 3 more. I'll make it quick. Metrics. So one of the unique things in this space is audit reports are often open source. You actually see the bugs after the auditors find them. And that's amazing. You don't really see that much in Web 2 security. So let's use this data. Let's actually put it into some formulas and see, like, are these reports good or not? So one way we could check is the percentage of critical or high risk findings over total findings. So if you're finding a lot of high risk findings compared to your overall findings, that's great. But we also need to consider the second order effects of measuring something like this. If we want to consider high risk findings as a good thing, then some people might say, well, all these findings are high risk, 100%. I'm amazing. So we need to also consider misrated findings. So we need to balance out the two. If you're considering a useless gas optimization as a high-risk finding, that's bad, so we need to disincentivize that. So these two go together, and these are just examples of some metrics we could look at. Some other metrics that might be useful. Looking at the number of unique audit findings. And what do I mean by this? Some audit firms that shall remain nameless may use scripting tools to find common bugs. These bugs are built into the script, and that means that most likely the audit firm is finding this bug again and again and again and putting it into a lot of reports. So this would be a non-unique audit finding. It's something that's scripted, and you see it in a lot of their reports. If you have a lot of unique findings, that's probably indicating that humans are spending more time and effort on the code, which is a good thing. So if we incentivize finding unique findings, that's a little bit like a proxy for measuring the amount of manual effort that goes into the review, which is a good thing. You want real smart people looking at your code, not just a script that's going to miss a lot of things. The last idea for a metric here is the speed at which the audit happens. If someone is looking at your code very slowly and taking a lot of time, that's a lot better than someone speed reading your code, just saying like, yeah, it all looks good, thumbs up, no issues. So measuring that is also something we could do based on reports. Here's some example numbers. I just made up some numbers to demonstrate what's good, what's bad, based on these few metrics I came up with. More unique findings is good. More serious findings, good. Fewer misrated findings is good. And fewer lines of code per day is good. The reason longer audits matter, this is probably quite obvious, but the more time an auditor has to understand the code in detail, the better chance they have of reaching what I call this region of max bugs. And this is when the auditor's understanding, at least of certain security aspects, exceeds the developer's understanding. And that's where the auditor can really find some logical errors that the developer completely overlooked. So that's sort of the goal of an an average audit, let's say. Okay, how do we implement this? Metrics, sounds great. We have the reports. A lot of them are open source. We need to parse the reports, and there is actually a project out there that's trying to do this. If you are working with any audit firm or are talking to audit firms, you can suggest that they create a parser so that the results can be added to this project. Then second point here is to get more feedback on what are useful metrics. I listed a few here. I'm not saying they're the best, but it's a starting point, and we can discuss and create others. There's a couple optional ideas. Organizing a group of audit firms to maintain and enhance the metrics. Over time, we might see these metrics are getting gamed. For example, if we say high-risk findings are good, more people will say they are finding high-risk findings, even if they are not high risk. Last point here, audit firms to contribute their own parsers. This is the ideal way that we would go about it. We need to incentivize people to add their metrics to this dashboard, and then create their own parser for their own reports, because each report is very customized. We need to parse them properly. So anyway, that's how we get metrics. Okay, standardized best practices and a checklist as well. At this point, unfortunately, most audit firms have their own process checklist. If you look for security checklists for smart contracts on GitHub, you'll find a ton of lists. They're all different. We don't really have a standardized go-to place. So having an open source list that's like the main resource that's updated would be amazing. And if we can standardize it across audit firms, and we say that this audit did in fact borrow from this checklist, that's great. I think personally, information sharing across the industry helps everyone level up, including new people to Web3 security. If you don't know Web3 security at all, you could go to this checklist and you can start understanding some of the common bugs that are found. For those who are worried that the secret sauce of their own internal secret checklist should not be open sourced, I would simply remind everyone of the cathedral and the bazaar approach, the famous closed source versus open source debate. Personally, I'm a bit of an open source fan. This is just an example of what an information repository can look like. Everyone's familiar with the Solidity docs, and this is like a go-to place to look for Solidity information. So if we could make something like this for security common bugs, then we have a go-to place that's updated. And yeah, I even thought of using the same format because I did start a repository of these common mistakes. It's very basic. I started it 2 days ago, but I will be fleshing it out more in detail. And basically, once it's hopefully the best checklist that's open source in the space, we can then recruit other experts to contribute to it and make it a go-to resource. Okay, last solution here, customer reviews. I don't think this one's very controversial. Having reviews of what other people thought of certain audit firms would just be useful for everyone. We do it for restaurants, why not audits, which are more valuable? Some of the categories we could have for feedback, you can think of like the 1 to 5 star rating system. Was the cost fair, or was it too expensive? Was it too cheap? Were the auditors communicating well? Sometimes auditors are just looking at the code, the developers have questions, and the auditors don't respond. Not good. Did the audit miss some findings? Did you get hacked after the audit? That would be terrible. And then did the final report meet expectations, or were there a lot of typos and mistakes? So just some ideas. Here's a fun example. The Belgrade Fortress. We have this nice 5-star review. Looks great. I just want to read out the 1-star review. It deserves 5 stars, but I was a bit nervous when Google asked me for my opinion, so I put 1 to vent some frustration. I think we can agree this sort of thing should be filtered out, but actually seeing reviews with this information would help. So again, it's just one step closer to better decision making. So how do we implement this? We need a reviews website. That's the most basic thing to submit and view reviews. We also need a way to prevent bots spamming the reviews website. Maybe an auditor really wants to promote their audit firm, so they put 100 5-star reviews. We need to make sure that one review correlates to one audit. Also so the developers can't shill the audit firm on the audit firm's behalf. Optionally, maybe we should allow the reviews to be edited at any point. So if a protocol gets hacked, maybe they want to downgrade the review of their past audit because they realize it was perhaps not so great. Okay, time to get close to wrapping this up. Why does any of this matter? Why should we worry about implementing these solutions? It sounds like a lot of work, to be honest. First of all, what gets measured gets managed. I think if we are actually trying to assess the quality of the output of audit firms, people will improve. The auditors will improve if they see their quality is not up to average or up to par, and audit firms will also try to improve their metrics. It's just the nature of the game. If you want to improve how you appear to the world, when there's actual data-driven metrics used, you need to try and actually make some changes. Most importantly for developers doing audits, the quality metrics will improve decision-making on which audit firm you go with and make sure that you're not overpaying, underpaying, and that you're getting what you expect. You don't want to end up in a situation where you fork over a lot of your funding and the result you get is definitely not what you were expecting. That's just a terrible, a very sad ending to the story, let's say. So helping developers make informed decisions about audits, and hopefully it will also enable fairer pricing in this space. Lastly, if we improve the security in the space, we reduce hacks, and I think everyone wants that. So that should be a motivating factor by itself. Okay, quick summary. I covered a lot. First point was audit quality is variable. Not all audits are equal. Secondly, quality metrics are possible at the auditor level, so at the individual level, and at the audit firm level, and at the report level. So there's a lot of ways this can go, and a lot of ways to slice and dice the data. Third, better data does improve decision-making for everyone, especially those who are trying to make a decision about audit firms or how to proceed with their security journey in the space. Finally, automated metrics that are automatically considering the latest reports. We need something automated to actually keep pace with this space because it's moving so fast that we don't want to have humans in the loop actually processing this data. So automated would be ideal, which is why we need the report parsers to collect the data. Okay, last slide. I want to leave you with a simple thought, which is increasingly true in software, and especially in this ecosystem, and that is, the question is not, can this be built, but should this be built? And if you want to join and participate in this journey, because it cannot just be a single person's journey, it has to take a movement, then you can join this Telegram coordination group. I'm going to be discussing what I'm doing. We can discuss other ideas on how to proceed, and ideally, once we get enough momentum, we can get some funding to actually make this possible at a greater scale. And at the end of the day, if we can actually make these quality metrics happen, it's going to improve security for the entire ecosystem. So if you're interested, feel free to join. The slides that also have this QR code, the link is right here. So that's the last slide, and I'll open it up for questions. We have a question here.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. It's a really hot topic. So I'm an auditor, so it's a subjective opinion, but I completely agree with you with your points from the last slide. But I doubt that it's possible, like, to build some really fair, like, rating of findings of auditor, because the reason is pretty simple. Like, if you charge a lot, you're a good auditor, you get pretty good source code, and it's difficult to find the really cool critical bugs there. And if you're like a beginner, you usually get some shitty code, so with a lot of issues. So you can be a leader, just go with shitty code, actually. But the question is, maybe it's wrong direction. Maybe it's better, like, to go along this direction which is used in other areas. For instance, I don't know, if you build some serious system, like, I don't know, in avionics, for instance, you need to follow guidelines how to actually develop code according to like hard guidelines. You should like to, I don't know, use properly your, like, I don't know, your repository, write documentation, document all steps, like have all tests, coverage. Then if you really goes like according to some security levels higher to like to the top level, you need to do some formal verification of your key like components, etc., etc. So maybe like moving this direction would be better. I mean, so having these guidelines. So if your project like meets certain level of security, then like, yeah, of course you need some auditing firm that can do or check all this like stuff for you. But this is a better like representation maybe for, I don't know, that actually that's not magic dust, because of course you can have like the best auditor in the world, but I don't know, he was sleepy or something.
These guidelines that you are talking about, is this for the developers implementing the code or for security auditors doing the audit?
For developers mostly, yeah.
Okay. I guess the perspective I take on this is that it's very hard to change the processes and opinions of a large number of people unless you give them some incentive. So if you're suggesting that all developers should follow this process, that's going to take extra time, and it's very unclear what they are getting out of the process. If they can instead save time, pay someone to do a security audit, and they think they're getting a similar result, they're probably going to take the lazy route because, let's be honest, it's developers. So I guess the approach here is that if we actually have some metrics, that's providing an incentive because it's public data. People can actually see, well, this audit firm is doing a terrible job based on the metrics, so maybe that's an incentive for them to improve and to avoid this firm. I think the good developers already are familiar with what they should be doing. Whether they do it is another question. But yes, I think generally I agree. It's a very difficult problem in general.
So to continue on the topic, say an auditing firm is forcing the implementation of these best practices, right, of test coverage, fuzzing, whatever. And due to that implementation, bugs are found that normally, you know, a tired auditor, like you mentioned, or someone who's having a bad day may miss that day. Those should also be accredited as found bugs to that audit company, because if that audit company didn't force the customer and the project to implement these measures, they wouldn't find them, and the audit company doesn't give a green light to the project unless they implement all these measures, right?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. This can actually go back to the idea of standardized best practices and checklists. So maybe we have a standardized checklist of what developers need to do or criteria they need to meet before the audit even begins. And if we standardize that across the industry, I think not only will the auditors be happy because the code they are looking at already meets some minimum threshold of quality, but it would also catch these issues like you are saying.
Yeah, often an auditor is going to spend a lot of time with the bad project just figuring out what is going on there and how does it even work, because all the crucial steps are missing. Onto the point of reviews, so you mentioned customer reviews, but what about like bad projects reviewing auditors negatively because they gave them, you know, trouble for their bad practices, for their dark patterns, for the stuff that they are doing that is scammy and that is actually an issue?
Yeah, I think we would have to use something similar to what you see here, and we would just have to filter those out, because every review website I know of has something like this happening. So if you have a better solution, let me know.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, any other? One more.
Hi, I have a question about the metrics for the audit reports you have mentioned.
Yes,
So
the metrics.
there's a total findings. So that's how do you get the total findings? I mean, that's as a ground truth. I mean, for example, if there's one company and find for example 2 bugs and their total findings is 2.
Yes, so the total findings is per audit firm or audit individual. So the idea here is, let's say audit firm number 1 has done 10 audits. So we would use the parser that's developed for their reports to parse all of the findings, and we would have the total number of findings. And then we would try to calculate how many of those findings are high or critical risk for the serious findings percentage. So we need the parser in order to go through all of the reports and collect this data. But luckily, there is this project that's already working on this, Masamune, from a guy at Zelek. So we just need to create parsers for all of the different reports. But once we have that, we can collect this data quite easily and automated.
Yeah, but the only problem is maybe one project just, for example, employ 2 or 3 auditors or companies to do that. We cannot cover all the, for example, different companies, different auditor, different projects, right?
Let me see if I understand the question. So you're saying that some projects are doing 3 different audits, and that the later audits
Yeah,
will not find
that's
so
the
many?
ground truth. But if other audit companies start to join in, you cannot do it to measure their performance, right?
Well, the way I see it is this is taking the number of findings at scale. We're not looking at one project or one report. So even in a scenario where a project goes through 5 audits, and most likely the 5th audit is going to find very few bugs, that's not necessarily going to reflect so much because we're taking an average. And if you're also trying to mention or ask why total findings is even considered here, we're not saying that more findings is good. We're focused on normalizing. Let's get to the right slide here. We're taking the critical findings divided by the total findings. So it's not like more findings is good. It's more like more serious findings divided by the total findings is good. So even if you find 100 findings and they are all low-risk findings, that's not necessarily a good thing for this metric. This is just one or 2 metrics, though. I'm sure we can think of many others.
Yeah, I see. But there's a scenario because for example, I just give you 2 total findings and they are all critical findings. So there would be 100%, right?
Yes, so we would need to collect more data. There's some ways we could add a star when the amount of data points is below a certain amount, just so you can see that it's potentially not the most accurate number. You're right. If there are only 2 findings and they are both critical, and the audit firm never publishes another public report, that should be somehow that should be pointed out that they are trying to game this metric.
I see. Thanks.
Can I just ask one question? I believe this here idea makes sense, but the problem will be like if you go in a direction of the standardization, the amount of findings should actually slowly go down, and you should think more in a direction of creating an average of a total finding to see how the space is moving, and then relatively to this average, normalize everything. If you do it in a total absolute way, you will have a bias which will skew everything. We know that from the risk side. So, and the second part, if you're really going to build this kind of stuff, we are like really interested to work with you together on that side.
Excellent.
Yeah, so my question is twofold. I wanted to ask, do you have any rough estimate on the number of audits actually performed compared between the independent auditors and audit firms? And the second question is, to me, it seems that any standardization or anything along those lines should most likely come from the auditing companies actually working together. Is there any communication between them at all, other than people just jumping between audit firms and whatnot?
So let me answer the second question first. At this point, I really don't see much collaboration between different audit firms. It's more of a competitive environment right now, which is very unfortunate because at the end of the day, we should all be striving to make the ecosystem more secure and do a lot of information sharing. We don't have that right now. So that's part of the goal here with standardizing best practices and checklists. The first question, how many audits are being done by independent security auditors versus firms? I don't have a good estimate on that, and it might actually not be the best to just count the number of audits because the audits done by the individual people might be much smaller code bases. For example, just a very small NFT project that's mostly based on just ERC 721 default. So those sort of projects, maybe it does not make sense to go for a very large audit firm because the custom code is 100 lines. But yes, I have to say it's really mostly in the last 6 months that the independent security auditing movement has gained a lot of momentum. Okay, I might be out of time.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah.
So just to get the mic on. Thank you very much. A great talk. And you don't have to move anywhere because we'll be continuing with our security panel. Just give us like 2 or 3 minutes to get set up. And a huge applause for this.